if you send money.
So we're going to officially start the cut right here. So welcome to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy episode. I can't remember which. We've got our esteemed panel here. Sturgis Adams, Chris White, and Isaac
Rodebush.
All three are leadership icons in their respective categories, some in multiple categories. So we are definitely honored to have the collective mind share here for today's episode. Jumping in, Chris was just talking about something. Chris, introduce the topic that you were just talking about so we can ponder and pontificate.
Yeah, well, Sturgis brought up his wife, like zero interest in being involved in the purchasing of an NFT or crypto for that matter, and having explored, like, she knows about the bridge and she knows about these different ways to get into Web3.
She has Cash App. She buys purses.
Yeah.
She has Instagram followers, you know, and yet there's still this rift between her actual behavior, natural behavior, and, you know, the world that we're sort of collectively committed to building, right? And so it's really, it's like, I always try to put like her lens on when I'm thinking about how to meet the user truly where they are. We build this stuff. Right?
So this is a really interesting topic, Sturgis. So introduce our crowd to the level of competency, 1 to 10, your wife in crypto Web3. Where's the meter?
So I'd say she's like at a healthy 5, actually, because she uses, it's pretty good. That's why this is critical, right? Yeah. Because like she uses Cash App to buy Bitcoin on a bi-weekly basis, but she doesn't actually understand what that means.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's closed silo. You can't take it off.
Right. But she's been, you know, conditioned enough by the media and by her husband probably that she should be doing that.
So Isaac just dropped a little nugget here that is so fascinating. Isaac, tell us what you just said.
It's closed silo.
Yeah. 100%.
But okay, so
that means
basically, if you want to take your Bitcoin off of Cash App, you're not able to do that. You got to go back to your bank in dollars, go to another service or tool, buy Bitcoin, and hold it in your own personal wallet.
Yeah. So that's what the closed silo means. And so the fascinating part about this is that it dramatically reduces the utility of that Bitcoin purchase.
You can't earn interest on it. You can't use it as collateral.
Right.
You can't send it to a friend.
So here you have an early adopter that is, with the deepest respect, mildly uneducated here because she's just participating because society is saying this is interesting.
Yeah. And I think Cash App, on that note, has done a good job making an agile and sort of secure feeling enough product that, you know, she's willing to part with $200 that, you know, she just drops into the ether.
So this is
But you're absolutely correct. And yet she has no idea about that risk. Were she to be told that, I'd be really curious to see if she would care, because she kind of just wants to own Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So I want to interject here. I think we can flip this framework and say, because you're looking at it from the perspective of like, how can I push someone into adopting DeFi, adopting a digital asset usage, where if there's a carrot that's big enough, say I've used plenty of open source protocols, dApps, that have given me a carrot in the form of user rewards, airdrops, tokenized platform equity, to the point that if your wife were to use any one of those services and have a carrot of whatever her dollar amount needed to be to get her to claim that 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, for being a member of that community, she now would have this vested interest. I need to claim my $10,000 of this digital asset.
Yeah.
So I think that would be a huge event that would shift being like, I don't want to risk my own native capital fiat from my bank account to being like, I have this asset that I have generated from my participation in a protocol, a dApp, or a community that I want to claim now because I don't want to not capture that value I've been rewarded.
Yeah.
So I think that will be the type of event that is the bridging event to bring them to the other side.
And I think a big part of this is just the lack of knowledge about the availability of those things.
Absolutely.
Because-
If there was a big button in her Cash App that said
Yeah.
steak and it was blue and friendly, she will push it.
And
And
those,
just watch her.
Especially if it said
Ethereum.
2.5% next to it. you
Oh
know?
yeah.
and,
That's
She push
interesting.
it.
and those type of companies,
So.
Because she pushed it when it said buy Bitcoin.
So let's noodle on that just a hair. Why doesn't that button exist in the Cash App?
That's a good question.
there's a ton of reasons. They have a different business model. Like Instagram just started paying people to produce reels, and it's not very much, and it's not going to be as much as these drops are in DeFi and Web3 ecosystem. You know, seeing a $200,000 drop come in from an exchange, you're like, oh, that's awesome. You're not going to see that on Instagram, and it's going to be like a $6 drop. Maybe if you're a multi-million or follower influencer, you'll have a drop for 100,000 or something like that.
I mean, my wife, as an example, again, is one of the, chosen few that gets paid to post reels, and as to her dogs who have, our dogs who have equal audience share. And you're right, though, it's not nearly relevant enough to just be a sort of like a little bit of pocket change.
It's like, yeah, it's like what? Whatever, it's not enough to buy attention to even hardly mention to another individual because
Correct.
of the magnitude is so small.
Correct. But yet, and I mean, I don't want to go on a tangent here about like this Instagram
No, this is
reel
this
strategy.
is the tangent episode.
But yeah, clearly. That's why they brought me in.
This is the best episode.
but it's enough, and the way that the algorithm seems to work is they give you enough on the front end of, when you post your first reel, where it feels like it's worth doing again, and then it drops dramatically the second time you do it. But once you're doing it, that behavior is then trained, and you're going to go, well, am I going to make $25 or am I going to not make $25?
Sure.
For our dogs, it pays for their food. So I do the math.
So,
it works.
so this is a really interesting underlying topic. We're talking about mass adoption for the public, right?
Yes,
We're not
exactly.
talking about the degens. We're not talking about the early adopters. We're talking about not the 10%. We're talking about the 50%.
Correct.
All right. So 50% TAM, total addressable market, adoption, Web3. How do we get there? Go.
Well, to me, it's about, again, back to the original premise, it's about actually meeting the user where they really are. And my question still, because I think there's that rift between, those of us who really understand what like it is to stake, and, those of us who understand it at depth. I don't, compared to you, right? But yet I push the button, right? And where the actual user is, because I have a sense that there is this massive rift between, what we read about every day, and then you remind yourself that there are the actual audience that is pushing that stake button is surprisingly small compared to the audience of Instagram.
Infinitesimally small. Yes.
Yeah. So, if you think about trying to identify, where the user that we're aiming at in terms of defining mass adoption actually is, it's really hard to draw a circle around.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in sort of defining that user and like finding out where they really live on this spectrum. So then we can speak to them properly.
So to get to 50% of the Facebook TAM, which is half the world, it took only 16 years.
Right.
So where are we? Let's say 2006 is the genesis, right? When it came out of Harvard and into the non-EDU email address user accounts, right? So we're kind of in somewhere around in that space. So two questions, Chris. Where are we on the Facebook going from EDU only to any human to 2022 and 50% TAM, total addressable market? Where is Web3 today?
So I want to actually go back and answer your other question real quick.
I'll answer that really fast first, because I think the founders of Polygon would tell you that we're way before AOL.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Well, way before AOL would be Prodigy and CompuServe.
Way before that. There isn't even a friendly enough.
Way before that would be DARPA.
I'll take that.
Okay.
So we're not far.
That's my answer to that question.
So interesting. So we'll put a pin in that because that's a really provocative answer there. Chris, go.
So I think we're like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, they're all really good at doing something that is so sneaky. And that's tricking us and believing we can trust them. Because what they're doing is they're basically saying, hey, post this reel or whatever it is, sponsor content, and you get paid. And then all of a sudden, they built this trust with us saying, hey, I can now post these reels and get paid for it. Here's the sneaky part. They're going to cut down that dollar value drastically for every reel that you post. And the farther along time progresses, your posts are going to become less and less valuable. And so they build up this idea with these hundreds of millions of users that they can trust them to pay them money. I'll give you an example. When I was in high school, I started a YouTube channel.
Last week?
Last week. 10 years ago, whatever.
I had kids in high school.
I started a YouTube channel and I was working my way up. I had like 800 subscribers. I was super excited. I got paid.
You don't want to plug it? What's the name?
No, I don't want to plug it. No, let's not go back there. But
nothing ever truly disappears on the internet.
In a month,
Internet's forever.
In a month, I had made $200 on royalties. One of my videos hit 500,000 views in like 2 weeks. And as a high school kid, I was like, holy cow, this is amazing. I kind of slowed down, went to school, did a little bit, but not that much, and was still making, it gradually decreased. They built that trust and then it slowly decayed. And one day I got an email. It was from YouTube and it said, congratulations, we're upgrading our policies. You now get to participate in this new program. And if you don't have 1,000 subscribers and 100,000 minutes of view time, you no longer get any royalties.
Oh, really?
And so waking up to that email when I was making, by the way, very little, had a wife, this was a few years after and just living in this crappy little apartment.
The $200 was meaningful.
The $200 was amazing.
Yeah.
It contributed, it basically almost paid for groceries for 2 or 3 weeks.
That's hilarious.
And so then all of a sudden they were like, that's ours now. And this is what I'm talking about in these platforms that build this secret
It still
false.
happens in Web3 too. I had an NFT marketplace airdrop I got, and I never claimed it. And the community voted that anyone that hasn't claimed it loses it, or it goes back to treasury. So I lost that.
But you could read the contract, which
true. And I was just lazy, and it was like
Yeah.
a small enough dollar amount, like $1,000. I was like, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
Lost $1,000.
Sure, it can still happen, definitely, but the trustlessness is actually there. If you would have been knowledgeable of that contract, you could have known that they could do that. Whereas with YouTube, they were just like, hey, let's make this decision and take away this right with smart contracts. You just don't see that.
This starts to scratch at one of, I think, the most positive and inspiring things about the ethos of Web3, right? Like when you look at it through the lens of the creator, like what actually might make it different this time, right? Like the idealist in me truly, deeply wants to believe this, that what might make it different from Web 1 is this time that can never happen to you because you actually have skin in the game as a creator.
Right.
You're invested both technologically and sort of inspirationally as a creator. So that $200, whether or not you buy or sell that or keep that, that question will never have to arise if we build the tools correctly, right? And the tools, and I think part of building the tools correctly means we distribute them and educate the creators of tomorrow, in a way where they can claim that power. Right?
I think education is a huge aspect, and I think this will disrupt a lot of education and where people will get paid to get educated. And I see that happening because the value they participate in building in this ecosystem that they're in, whether it could be an influencer is basically an educator. And now if these members of the influencers community are now earning a digital asset that pays them for learning and participating in that community, it's offsetting the cost of their education, whether that cost be time, whether that cost be dollars. I see a disruption in education, lowering the costs of education through this.
And do you think that's going to get us to the 50% TAM? That's going to get us to mass adoption?
I think the answer is decentralized in like so many ways itself too.
Yeah.
Just like there's going to be a lot of ways, and your wife could get pulled in, whether it's through a big carrot that she needs to claim, or whether it's through Instagram implementing a digital asset.
Yeah.
I think
I see a battlefield being set though, right? And like we're seeing evidence of it from a longer term strategy. You can imagine a planning meeting, of inside of Meta being like, let's dump a whole bunch of money into training a user behavior where people are going to post reels, right? We'll pay them to do it. We got to retain these creators. We also have to carve out, the tranche of creators of tomorrow. P.S. Like out of the corner of my mouth, I'm whispering like that's going to play really nicely into our NFT strategy because we have to keep them. You have to keep them. And of course, the next thing you're going to be able to do as a creator, who's already in the Reels program is mint an NFT inside of Meta.
And that's going to, you think that's going to usher in
that's the 50%. Attempt. Well, that's their attempt to usher in the 50% that stays on Instagram. Right? Well, because that's what's critical here. And then of course it can extend out to the rest of the ecosystem of Meta. But it's probably with apologies to my smart colleagues who are fighting the good fight internally at Meta and building cool things, like I see that as potentially not a helpful sort of cultural effect. It does seem to fly in the face of the ethos of Web3 that you're
I think mass adoption is going to have to come from these larger institutional players, whether it be government or large institutions. Like Colorado is going to do on-chain identity, driver's license, birth certificate, and that is an NFT because it's a unique identifier representing one individual, and there's not two of them. And so now that you have this type of digital asset identifier, that's the government now making it acceptable and making it standardized. And then we use that as identifiers to log into big social media platforms rather than using Google 2FA. We have our NFT that is associated with our public key. It's like a gated
So let's take that question.
Because even on Instagram, I know we keep going back to them, but like you could have people making multiple accounts under the same person, and now you're like, oh, this is authenticated on chain, and these other accounts aren't. So authenticity is going to be better in that area.
So taking that question to its logical next step, what's going to go DeFi first? A country, a brand, or a company?
It's a race.
Right. Which do you think is going to come first? Go.
Well, I think we've already
country. Well, just give the answer. Country,
I think brand. We've already started to see native DeFi brands emerge, right?
Brands first.
Yeah, we've already started to see that, I think, and I think they're, interestingly enough, they're in a foot race with countries.
Which brand could be a possibility?
I think one of the first. I know there's a hot button title, but I think one of the first native Web3 brands is probably the Bored Ape Yacht Club.
Interesting. So a new brand.
Native, these brands will be native to Web3.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, it's like I've stopped trying to teach my grandparents of the inner workings because it's going to be the younger generation that adopts them.
The number one computer company in the 90s was a company called Dell Computer Corporation, and it didn't exist in the 1980s. And so that's your proposal. Chris, country, brand, or company, which is first?
Well, I definitely don't think it's country.
El Salvador?
Yeah.
I don't think they're fully, and I think they're struggling a lot with it too. So I guess we could categorize in terms of successful and brand. I think, like Sturgis said, like Bored Ape Yacht Club is a great example of a born Web3 organization or brand that has done really well.
So it launched
crazy well.
It launched in Web3.
Yeah.
And so you think that, so it's interesting if you take the converse of that statement, what you're saying is that you don't think that any traditional brands are going to successfully convert?
I do. I think that will probably happen.
But there's no legacy they have to forget.
Well, I'll put it this way, they're going to have to. convert, right? I mean, like this is this. I mean, we saw this from Web 2 to Web 1 to Web 2. I mean, remember the brands that like were unconvinced that social was something they should be a part of? No, you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
You just have to admit you were wrong, kind of.
Yeah, so I think that they'll have to convert, but we're going to also see great fortunes made and great brands built, like very much within a pure sort of Web3.
so what those answers then imply is that the brands or commercial will go Web3 first, and then later that utility will be identified and then commercialized so that countries could eventually go Web3, and then all companies would go Web3. So brands first, who's second, companies or countries?
The construct of even a company is really the government and what they want a company to be that best fits their models for tax harvesting. Outside of that, why else is a company structured the way it is?
Interesting.
So interesting what I see a lot of these NFTs being issued, being as far away from securities as they can be in traditional financial vehicles, is just even transforming what we call companies and moving towards DAOs and autonomous organizations that aren't even tied to a specific country or a specific geological jurisdiction. They could be even, we have nodes for Ethereum on the International Space Station. So it's like, how do you apply the regulatory laws of any one country on something that is not abiding in on Earth, like on the International Space Station?
So that's interesting. So companies second and countries third. So question for Isaac: when over and under 2030, first country DAO, over and under 2030.
So
is it beyond 2030 or is it before 2030?
I'm kind of seeing.
Did you say country?
Yeah. First country DAO over and under on 2030. Is it after 2030 or is it before 2030?
I've got that answer. It's actually the board yacht club country.
Well, yeah, I've even seen.
It might be a country that doesn't even exist.
Let me qualify that. It's got to be one of the 196 countries.
It's got
I mean, think about
that's tough. Because I see these other small land plots that are already in the process and their workings of becoming what they say like.
Yeah. When one of the first
country
traditional, well, most people would consider country, I believe there's 196 of them on the planet, over and under 2030, will it happen before 2030 or will it happen after 2030?
I'll just, if it's one of the, I'll just say before.
But there you go.
I think even the structure
so in 8
of what
years.
we're calling a country is like, I'm glad that we're even questioning, like we're questioning finally over the last 5 years, more like, where is money? Where does it come from? How is it generated? Now we're like, hey, let's look at these government structures, where they come from, how are they created, why are they created? And just like social media allowed us to be broadcasters and producers, people are becoming their own banks and almost like their own Federal Reserves, issuing assets and backing it by their own products and services. So it wouldn't even begin to surprise me as we're starting to see some of these like remote islands that people are coming, these micro countries. That almost seems like bleeding edge.
I definitely believe the micro country is going to be imminent, if not this year. But a traditional country going with a DAO, I think is beyond 2030. What do you think?
There's just so that, I mean, the problem lies in existing infrastructures, and like same thing with tax reform. How do you fix tax? How do you fix like the medical industry? There's just so much existing regulation, and rather than like wiping the slate clean and starting fresh, everybody's just trying to like be backwards compatible. And that's not going to work.
Interesting.
And so really it's, I mean, for a country to do that, they're going to have to say, okay, well, let's just like start fresh. You know what I mean?
So there's countries that have done something kind of like that in going commercialization. A lot of people come back to the Ireland experiment, right, with taxes, and they got this huge influx of Silicon Valley, United States, $1 billion or $1 trillion companies coming in for the tax haven, reducing the corporate tax by 60–70%, something along those lines. That was a nation state policy. So there is precedent for the concept. All they had to do is take that to its endpoint.
Yeah.
And then that then would allow for a DAO. I think that's more than 8 years out. Sturgis?
Well, I don't know. I think about, in response to criticism, Obama used to talk about how hard it was to turn a cruise ship 90 degrees, and I think, the level of bureaucracy and that we sort of have, and how entangled, these, borderlines are with the global economy, et cetera, like it's just impossible to do it if it's not done micro step by micro step, right? So like I look at countries like, or even cities, I think happening on like a local level is really interesting, right? Like if you look at like Sao Paulo, I think it is, that was able to erase any outdoor advertising.
Oh, really?
Like across the entire city, you won't be advertised to when you're walking down the street. Imagine that. We all went, oh my God, we can't even imagine that, right? But it's interesting to me to sort of think about these small steps toward, what yeah.
So okay, let's dig a little bit deeper into that. How inclusive was the ban? Could I put a sign on a taxi cab and drive around?
I don't think so. I think you have to ask a citizen, because it's almost the question isn't as much like, how strict they were, as much as it is like, how did it feel to the citizen? You know what I mean?
Interesting.
Like that's the answer you want.
And most people would be like, the purpose behind that, just less chaos. So.
I can't even remember. I think it was sort of a cultural initiative that got a lot of, popular vote. And so they went with it. Right. And it was probably a policy agenda. I don't know.
Yeah, that's very fascinating. So Sturgis brought up a really provocative topic of where are we now if you take the entire history of the internet, starting with DARPA, it's a research project, late 60s, early 70s, all the way through to Tim Berners-Lee and the university connection of 7 universities. Then you bring in, and of course that brought in HTTP and the hyperlinked world. And then you have Mosaic and Mark Andreessen with Netscape Navigator, which brought in graphics and a lot of other things. And then shortly after came JavaScript. And then shortly after that came the entire explosion of the dot-coms. Then shortly after that came Web 2 with social media. And now we're at Web 3 in 2022. So we went from late 60s,
take a breath,
late 60s to early 2020s. Sturgis says we're at DARPA.
I'm quoting the founders of Polygon.
Oh, it's not you.
I agree with that, because they seem to be delivering pretty stable infrastructure. And if they're telling me that it's really hard to deliver that infrastructure, and that's where they are on their map,
that's interesting.
I'll get in that book.
That's interesting. So all DARPA did was create fundamental lower level communication protocols. I would think that we're beyond that, but Chris White.
So, I mean, I've been a developer for like 10 years. And 3 weeks ago, I started writing Solidity and, working on smart contracts and stuff like that. And I will tell you what, there are a lot of nuances and very difficult things to work around where you're like, I have no idea what's going on, why this is breaking. So I think farther along than that, but I think the acceleration of progress is going to be insane. And we've already seen it. You know, as a developer, as anybody trying to learn something, you jump on YouTube and you watch videos. 2018 I was watching a video this morning, didn't even look at the year. I just started watching it, just trying to learn my way a little bit better around the systems and around testing. And
so where are we?
So from 2018 to now, like 100 times better. Like there's just so many.
We're definitely 100 times better. And there's been this exponential curve in progress. So the question, Chris, is that late 1960s to 2022 is effectively the history of the internet.
Yeah.
In the history of Web3, where are we? What year from late 60s to 2022 are we in Web3?
Well, I think we're probably in like the 80s or 90s, but I think that getting to where we are now, but I think it's gonna, but I think the years are not gonna be linear.
Yeah.
I think time is gonna be an exponential
There was
factor.
a
We're gonna
pretty
move along
exponential
faster.
with the internet, each one of them being 3 or 4 orders of magnitude. And so you're going to cut it right in the middle. Isaac, where are we in the spectrum if you compare Web3 to the internet, late 60s to 2022? What year are we?
It's so hard.
Join me in the middle.
I'll just use my birth year, 91.
91.
You join me in the middle.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Well,
that's
because
so
I
interesting.
think
91 because that
this
is Tim
Pretty
Berners-Lee's
good. It's a pretty
Opus
good guess.
Magnus.
businesses are raising more capital and having shorter life cycles, but they're generating stupid amounts.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think the life cycle of Uber is going to be very long compared to the life cycle of like Union Pacific Railroad, you know?
Interesting.
But the amount of capital that Uber has generated compared to Union Pacific Railroad would just be interesting to compare, and the amount of time they take to do it. So I could even, that's one of my concerns right now is like some of these life cycles, and like if they're creating vesting schedules that are like 4 years, and like the life cycle of the company is only like 3 years, possibly. Like how long were cassettes around? How long were CDs around? Like before the MP3 came along, like the life cycle was just pretty short, but they still were like raised a ton of money and did a great thing for their.
Interesting.
Yeah, I even think of like my life, like there's a certain window of time where like I'm changing diapers, you know, that's a short window, and that's gonna sail, and then I'm moving on to the next like.
You're changing diapers.
I think a really cool.
Well, he's got to be changing diapers.
I think we're all in the
You're
diaper changing.
We're all in diapers. So.
Freshman,
That's fun. We got a good
he's
crew.
gonna be changing my diapers first.
What are you talking about? We're talking about Fountain of Youth from Elon Musk's next venture. What are you talking about?
Yeah, that's it.
But you know, I think you're poking at something sort of interesting though in terms of life cycle, which is there's also the stuff that we. This is the most exciting part to me, right? Is there's the stuff that we can't even imagine yet, you know, because the groundbreaking moment, you know, whether it's the App Store or the iPhone, depending on who you ask, right? Or you know, or social or Netscape or DARPA, right? I mean, that moment arguably has not occurred in Web3 yet, right? Which just changes everything. And if you think about where we've come, even from last year, you know, the ethos is always a little bit separate from the culture, right? The acting practice, right? But like we didn't know what the Bored Ape Yacht Club was last year. We didn't know I didn't know what staking was really last year. I'd heard about layer 2, right? But like, you know, these things are going to increase exponentially, and I think there's also going to be something that just emerges that we don't know about yet. It's either being built in a garage or a dorm room now, and that's incredibly exciting to me. And like that's kind of where my money is in, you know, is just trying to stay with that current of what I can't imagine it's beyond the horizon.
So I love what Sturgis just did there. He's talking about the unknown unknowns, and that's always this professional humility we all have to have, because the smartest minds in the world don't know what you don't know. I mean, my answer is really simple. It's 1998. The reason it's 1998 is because what I do is I take Web3 and I break it down backwards, and then I overlay that on top of the internet. And so Web3 doesn't exist without the blockchain. Blockchain doesn't exist without the original white paper. The original white paper doesn't exist without public key encryption. And so I put public key encryption, which of course is this very well understood, but extraordinarily complicated set of mathematics that is almost identical in complexity as well as infrastructure importance as DARPA. And so then you move forward from public key encryption to the blockchain. And that is, and I don't want to get into too much of the technicals, but going from DARPA all the way up through the various different network layers is the internet, TCP/IP, which is the underlaying of what's the next piece. Okay, so that's the blockchain. And then what's the next piece on top of the internet. And there's this big misconception that when I go to a web browser, I'm going to the internet. You're absolutely not going to the internet. You are going to content published on the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web communicates over something called the internet. And so the analogy of the blockchain is that whenever you interact with Web3, you actually do not interact with blockchain, sorry. And when you interact with Web3, you actually do not interact with the blockchain. What you interact with are marketplaces, NFTs, wallets, tokens, et cetera, et cetera. That's the web. But we're at the beginning of that. And what was the beginning of that? It was 1995. What happened in 1995? You had companies that had extraordinary valuation expansions with almost no earnings, and you had speculative natures, and you had the creators come out in droves. And always, it's so interesting. New technology is led by inspiration and passion. It's almost always led by artists,
Yes.
which is exactly what happened in 1990. It's exactly what's happening now with all of your PFP drops and all the likes of CryptoKitties and Bored Apes and some of the new stuff that's coming out with animation in 3D on some of the new editions drops are extraordinary from an art perspective, but it's still art. And it's still this medium that is on top of the blockchain, which is underpinned by public key encryption. Public key encryption, DARPA, blockchain, internet, all the current tools, World Wide Web. So I think right now, and then you can take this back because what most people in today's world can't even fathom that March of 2021, only slightly more than a year ago, Bored Apes was born.
Yeah.
That's crazy. It was only 14 months ago that this happened. And you had those same types of conversations in 1998. This is 1998. There was also a crash in 1998. Long-term capital management on the financial side, but there was a huge correction in tech stocks. From that correction, look at the names that were created, most of which don't exist today. A little company called Google was created in that crash in 1998.
Wow.
And so what Sturgis just said here is just so important, that one of the largest companies in the history of the planet was created in 1998 in that crash. We are now in a Web3 crash. I believe that today is 1998.
It's a good time to be in, also scary. Amazing parallels.
What say you?
Yeah. When you're talking about just like the financial aspects, I was talking to a wealth advisor and just hearing their issues with like capital efficiency, and then how much regulation they had that cost them time and fees and money, and how if someone's going to manage their own personal assets in this space, you can have, because such high capital efficiency and such low regulation, you can have an order of magnitude less capital and still generate the same amount of returns as someone with an order of magnitude more capital. I'd say because the regulation and the capital efficiency.
Interesting.
So that's really incredible.
So that's a really interesting one. So you're talking about leverage there, and of course, as some of you who are been in the professional world for more than 14 years knows that the infamous 42-to-1. That is, of course, what brought down Lehman Brothers and ultimately the entire planet from a financial perspective. 42-to-1 leverage on their.
I wouldn't say that
portfolio.
necessarily even leverage. I just think the freedom to drive, like an airplane, you can fly from here to California in a couple hours, where the regulation and restriction and speed limit and stop signs and lights to drive there and the limitations on the vehicle, like, are just going to take you a lot longer to get to the same place.
This is a fascinating topic.
And so like you're going to have more risks participating, just like we have an order of magnitude less regulation, you're going to have more risks and exposure, but at the same time allows you to fully run.
Well, look at the regulations that we have right now on Web 2. privacy laws. We have employee practice laws. We have unions that are forming, that are slowing Web 2 presences such as Amazon, et cetera. You didn't have any of those in 1998, and you don't have any of them right now in Web 3. So now the next question that everybody would ask is that if we're in the various times that you guys all have opined, what's the greatest opportunity in Web 3 right now? Go.
I think the creation is what you should be doing right now. You should be building, even if you don't know what you're building, you should be building. Whether that means you're building, lenses or you're building companies, now is the time to build. And it's never been easier to build things because of the tools that we've been given.
Interesting.
That's my drop right there.
So Isaac, build.
Yeah, and that's
just go.
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna go into the why of that is what you're doing, and what all this is doing is cutting out unnecessary middlemen. And if you're not building, that means you're using the products or services of someone else. But when you build, you're able to get as close to bare ground, growing, building as you possibly can be. So you can have the most sweat equity, you can have the least amount of risk and the most amount of risk, I guess, depending on how you're defining risk. But you're the closest to the source and being able to make things happen with the skills and knowledge and resources available to you. And no one else is standing in between you and that. So I'm really glad you said that. And I really think with all of this technology allowing to harness the value that we have, whether it's through wearables and tracking our medical stuff, and then we have the ability to send that to a medical company, and there's just going to be so many different layers. Like right now, many people have one income, where say if we have 1,000 incomes from different wearables, that almost is like so too much to even think about managing all those. But there'll be that many forms of value in building all those. Yeah.
Well, I think if we just look at where a lot of the big companies are headed, like think about Apple and what their primary focus has been in development, their cameras.
Yeah,
they put so much emphasis in their camera systems that in devices that every like millions of people have just in their pocket. And we're getting to the point where if you want to create a 3D model of something that you then own and can turn into an NFT or take an amazing, beautiful picture with just the phone in your pocket, like we have that power now. And so, yeah, I mean, just look at where all of these big businesses are putting all their focus in it. And it's really the creative. I mean, Apple is giving us utilities that we kind of pay this one-time fee for. Whereas with like Facebook, I mean, they're creating all these, or Meta, they're creating all these utilities because they want you to use the content you create on their platforms. But DeFi is going to unregulate all that. We're going to see so much more opportunity for creators to take their content, and even if it's like body data, right? Your gait when you go running, if you want to ship that off to a decentralized running company who then takes all that data and aggregates it and turns it into something useful, that revenue stream for professional runners is to say, well, I don't only wear, the Nike and the shoes, whatever, they're sponsored by Nike, but they're also sponsored by running data company DeFi or DAO, whatever.
So interesting. So as we wrap up here, we're going to talk about how does Web3 disrupt or destroy companies or categories. As we end this podcast, Sturgis, tell us what's the biggest company or category that gets disrupted or destroyed by Web3? Go.
Well, I mean, I got to answer that somewhat broadly. I think the problem actually, when we think about Web3, is to try to use the word disrupt. What we should be thinking about is completely reinventing what it means to experience media.
So which company or category is going to be most impacted?
I think the most, you mean like what, like who's going to collapse?
Yes.
I think entertainment as we know it is going to change.
Huge category.
Completely. I think it's going to change completely. I think the ability that we're already seeing to deliver content in context is starting to shift the way we perceive, reality itself. And it certainly should shift the way that I think and is already shifting the way creators are thinking about creating. right? It's shifting the way we certainly consume it on top of that. So storytelling has like clear, universal truths that haven't changed for eons. And the way we get to deliver those truths is going to be completely different.
Entertainment disrupted. Chris.
Well,
company or category?
I'm not saying that Spotify is going to have a real hard time with this. I think they will. I don't know if it's going to be one of the most, but music or whatever. But if you think about like the current model for Spotify, right? You publish your music, you get some plays, and you get some part of payment, right? Well, if you decentralize that through a DAO, whatever, some organization that then you upload your music and then you get paid literally, like the cut is so much smaller, and the data and the analytics are so much more trackable and accurate, and then from a subscriber point of view, it's kind of like you pay for what you listen to. Like imagine some current music token, whatever, and I buy 1,000 of it, and that basically gives me 1,000 listens, and maybe it's $10 a month, right? But the market will drive the cost of those.
Absolutely.
And the value of the song or how much it's listened to, and this is probably a terrible example, somebody's going to solve this in a much cleaner way, but the more a song is listened to, maybe the more expensive it is to listen to, right? And so you're going to, or maybe they just make more money because more people are listening to it. And so I think we're going to see so many DAOs that just come out of the woodworks that nobody knows about that are going to solve these problems. And I think music, I think music and movies, Netflix, if they don't get involved in this and get away from traditional subscriptions, I think they're going to lose a big market share.
And I'm agreeing with you 100%. I'm lumping sort of entertainment into that. And we're already seeing that, right? Anyone's ever been to the Aoki-verse, right? It has to have, the token in order to go to the concert. It also gets free songs. Diplo just dropped 2 NFTs that are songs, which is first, the NFT or the song. It's brilliant.
All right, Isaac. Biggest disrupted company or category, who goes down because of Web3?
So I think of in my life, what have I stopped using because of this? And I have to say, I've stopped. I don't watch TV. If I do, it's like influencer, it's a podcast, or if there's maybe like 2 shows my wife has. But like if you're trying to get to me through ads on TV, like you're not really gonna have success.
That is so interesting because all of the major ad groups are wailing and whining about that exact topic, in that they are, and then of course on the other side, the media companies are seeing huge drops in their revenues because they to their demise, set their contracts based on television views when 50% of their views are non-linear. So that's so interesting.
They can even track.
It's like someone else will provide better content or will pay me more for my attention, I think is what
so it's kind of interesting. The common theme between entertainment, media, and television is that they are all in that media category.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's all media.
It's all in that media category. And none of you mentioned industrial, transportation, real estate, those different
I think those are things that
services
that are going to grow from, I look at real estate, and I think you'll add another value layer.
That's so fascinating because
you'll have your renter, and then you can have your NFT that you sell fractional, just create additional levers of capital efficiency.
It's a really good point though, because I mean, I wonder if the reason, not that I don't believe that it will transform the way we buy real estate and transform the way, that type of industry.
But who will destroy?
But I mean, I think when my instincts just went to media, maybe that's because, I've worked in forever, so I know the landscape better, but, I also have this sense that it moves more quickly, and the disruption of it does, at least.
Well, look at Blockbuster.
But I don't know if that's true. It's just sort of an
Blockbuster with Netflix.
You take media
think about how
and
quickly
distill
that
it down. to the lowest common denominator, it's communication information of one person's opinion or agenda that they're trying to share with a larger group to sway them.
Yeah.
And so that's gone from like CNN to micro influencers, and I don't know. That's where it gets weird too, is you don't want to have your micro influencer like being the person that you get your government news from. And yeah, there's just so many changes. I don't even
Well, no, I agree.
And that's
I agree.
why you see the old people are like, oh, you get your news from someone on Instagram.
Interestingly enough, though,
then
like,
you don't
how
care.
different is the micro influencer from like a proverbial neighbor?
So I'm going to take a different angle. I think the biggest company or category to get disrupted, if not destroyed, is payment processors.
Mm.
Yeah, that's probably true.
I think
That's a no-brainer. Yeah, that's definitely gonna happen.
I think that they are the New York Times and the Borders Books and the Circuit City and the Blockbuster all combined, because I have worked in every aspect of the payment processor supply chain. And it is insanely, it's borderline corrupt. Obviously, it's not corrupt, so just for their purposes. It's so inefficient.
Yeah.
And it is so rife for disruption. And it's not because of volume, scale, and risk. But DeFi doesn't care.
Right.
And so I think the companies in category that is the most at risk, they are on the precipice of 1,000-foot cliff, and they're blindfolded, walking on the edge of that. That's how precarious I believe payment processors are with Web3. And I think that's going to be the most disruptive. I think actually all of these others, but I actually think with entertainment and television and media, I think that they will be wildly disrupted, but I don't think that any of the companies will go down. I think that they'll transform, get absorbed, get acquired, and those types of things. But I don't believe that'll happen with the payment processors.
They might just, you think they'll actually die?
I think that they're in deep, deep trouble.
It's funny how many people you brought up the
It's funny, you know, when not to interrupt you, but when you said that, to me, the first sentence out of my mouth, honestly, I wanted to be like, I kind of thought they were already dead. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was like I thought that was without.
DeFi, you sort of accept.
Well, okay,
DeFi, you sort of accept that they're already dead.
Do you hold more value in digital assets than you do in a US bank?
Yes.
That's me. Yes, for me.
Yes.
Probably
But
not.
we're probably a little bit of an outlier.
I have more in digital than liquid fiat.
Yeah, so you have more in digital assets than you hold in a US bank account.
Liquid fee. Yeah.
Liquid
So
fee,
in other words, like outside of other.
Yeah, like your house equity and stuff.
No, I mean,
investments, like
Sure.
so I think, yeah, that's already getting to the scale of like seeing even on Twitter and all these other places where guys will be like, I have retirement levels of crypto, but I have like $1,000 in the bank.
Right. All right. Well, this has been enormously entertaining. I can't thank you guys enough. The collective mind share here it's just tenable. And so I can't wait to have this panel back. We'll definitely have to do this again. But for all of you out there, that's a wrap.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy.
It's been good.
Yeah, that was